Great Scott! Adam Scott here. Today we're talking about the PS3. What an amazing piece of hardware this was. It had some of the best exclusives of the day, and it birthed some of the most iconic franchises that are around even today. The problem is, with many of these exclusives, if there wasn't a remaster that brought them forward to a new generation, they're literally locked on the original hardware. So what I want to do is take a look at the games from my collection that are locked away on the PS3 hardware. Up first is 3D Game Heroes. This is an absolute love letter to those old school action RPGs. It takes more than a little inspiration from The Legend of Zelda. You go around the map, you fight tons of baddies, you go into dungeons and explore to find the magical orbs. You want all of the magical orbs to bring peace to the land. Now, I wasn't kidding. You can tell just how much this looks like The Legend of Zelda. One thing that was really cool about this was the swords. You had all sorts of different swords that you could collect throughout the game. You could level the swords up through the blacksmith. You could make them longer and wider with different magical abilities. And when you really leveled these bad boys up, they would literally cover the entire screen and just decimate everything in the screen. It was awesome. It was a mix of the old school Legend of Zelda, like the original Legend of Zelda, or maybe A Link to the Past, but also had this really cool 3D aesthetic using voxel graphics that just stood out, and it looks awesome even today. This one is really great for anybody who has that nostalgic itch for any of those action RPGs of the third and fourth console generation. All right, the next one is just a magical and amazing time, and I think it flew under people's radar. It's a real shame because of how amazing it is, and that's Folklore. Folklore weaves the tale of two different protagonists together, and it's really cool how they the stories intertwine with each other. There's also two different worlds. There's the regular world where you're exploring this village to uncover the mystery. You're talking to people and you have these different puzzles to go and figure out. But then there's the Netherworld. The Netherworld's very different, where it's really an action RPG. So you go around and fight these different monsters called folk, and as you defeat them, you can actually collect them and use them to fight by your side. It's kind of like Pokemon in that way. They all have these different powers, and what you can do then is map them to the buttons on your controller and then use them as if they're a different type of attack or a different type of magical power. It was just a ton of fun, and I remember that this had some 6-axis control. Remember when the games really tried to work that 6-axis into the gameplay? Well, this is one that I think did it really well. It didn't overdo it. It just did it in a way that kind of enhanced the feeling of pulling those spirits out of the folk. You can see the art style is just amazing. It's just a beautiful game, a beautiful story, and this is one that's a shame it's locked away on the PS3. You know, something that's really interesting about the games locked away on the PS3, there are many that are really iconic and actually signature franchises for Sony. The next one here is actually in the God of War series of all things, and that's God of War Ascension. Up until the 2018 reboot, these were just hack and slash rage machines. There wasn't a lot of depth to the story, but there was a lot of mechanical depth to the fighting. And this one is no different. Now, this one doesn't really do anything that the other God of War games haven't done before. This kind of feels like God of War 3.5, where it's not really treading any new ground from a story perspective. The mechanics are more or less the same as what you've seen before. There are still those huge set pieces that just blow your mind when you realize how, small Kratos is with a giant stage around just crumbling around him. Something that this game did that was actually pretty new was multiplayer. Multiplayer hadn't really been done before in a God of War game. It wasn't the most successful thing in the world, but it was an interesting attempt for sure. And really, how could you go wrong with God of War? Any God of War game is just going to be bloody, gory, action, fun, and you're going to have a good time. You know you are. Okay, another one of those iconic franchises that is locked away on the PS3 is Killzone. So I have the Killzone Trilogy here. This has Killzone 1, 2, and 3. They're locked away on the PS3 hardware. One thing that was pretty funny about Killzone, and actually pretty funny about a lot of the games that came out around this time, were the implementation of the different PlayStation gimmicks. Whether that was playing with the 6-axis, using the Move controllers as a gun, Also, Sony was really pushing their 3D TVs at this time, and Killzone was also compatible with those 3D TVs. Cool concept, but it never really picked up. Now, if you remember back when these games came out, they were really meant to be the Halo killers. You remember every couple of years there was a game that came out, a first-person shooter that was gonna be the Halo killer. And with Killzone 1 coming out on the PS2, then getting remastered and put onto the PS3, these were the Halo killers of this generation. I can definitely see why. There's a lot of the overlap with Halo. There's sci-fi, great gunplay, the menacing enemies with the Hellghast, kind of the ultra-militaristic characters that you're going against, really evil. And so these were some amazing games. Now, if you remember for Killzone 2, that was notorious for that E3 trailer. If you remember, it just looked so amazing. It was touted as being kind of actual real-time, in-engine, in-game footage, and that was just absolute bullshit at the time. Like, that was not the case. That was not in-engine. That wasn't happening in real time. It still looked fantastic, but that was kind of the start of those trailers that really were misleading. It was a few steps down from what they showed. But even with that being said, these were still fantastic, fantastic games. And it's a shame that the series has kind of died off. You know, there was a Killzone game, Killzone Shadowfall, that came out as a launch title for the PS4. Looked fantastic, but it just didn't have that heart and soul of the original 3, and there hasn't been a game since, so we'll see if there's actually going to be a follow-up if they carry this series forward. All 3 of those original games are locked onto the PS3 hardware. Alright, another franchise that was born on the PS3 and absolutely was a game changer was Little Big Planet, and I have 1 and 2 here. These were colorful, charming, kind of goofy platformers that looked like real-world objects. You know, you played as Sackboy, you looked like a little boy made of yarn, but what made this game so amazing was the creation tools. Before we had Dreams on the PS4, we had Little Big Planet on the PS3. You could literally make just about anything you wanted, and you could share it all over the world. So you could see the creations of so many talented people who just let their imaginations run wild. You got beautiful imagery, you got kind of copycats of levels from other games, and you had full games that people made in the engine for Little Big Planet. I was never very good at creating my own levels or playing around with it, my brain doesn't work that way. But browsing what other people made, you could get lost in just a sea of just incredible creations. There's not nearly enough of that today where somebody can truly just express themselves using this palette of tools, and it was just such a cool thing at the time. Alright, another iconic franchise and one that's synonymous with PlayStation, one that really opened my eyes to the stylings of Hideo Kojima, and that is Metal Gear Solid 4: Guns of the Patriots. Up until this point, I played a little bit of Metal Gear Solid 1, a little bit of Metal Gear Solid 2, but that was it. It never really captivated me until this game. It was freaking amazing. I love how the suit would change to any environment that you were around. I always tried to navigate the levels without getting any kills and without getting spotted, and that was just a blast. One thing that I thought was kind of funny is there were so many guns in the game. It's more of a challenge and it's actually more fun to knock people out or to just go through completely stealth, but there's a lot of guns that you could use too. Something that was really notorious and kind of infamous about this game at the time were the cutscenes. They were long. I remember that this was one of those times where you could literally put your controller down and it would fall asleep before the cutscene was over. You know, 30 minutes for a single cutscene. I think when you added it all up, all of the different cutscenes together, it was about as long as the total gameplay. It had such a crazy story, it had such great gameplay. It was one of those things that it absolutely captured me. And from there, I played all of the rest of the Metal Gear Solid games. You know, of course I had to play Death Stranding. His style is just, it's a style all of his own, and it's really awesome to see him branch out, move away from Konami, and start to be totally unleashed. And it's crazy to think that he was leashed in the days of Metal Gear Solid 4.
Brother, it's been too long.
Alright, switching from an overly serious story with stealth gameplay to super bombastic and cartoony fun with Ratchet and Clank: Tools of Destruction. You play as a Lombax, of course, named Ratchet, with his sidekick Clank, and you travel around the universe to fight the baddies with this crazy arsenal of weapons and gadgets. Insomniac really honed their skills with this series, where you're constantly acquiring new gadgets and new zany, crazy guns that each have their own unique purpose. There's a little bit of platforming, but it's really all about the guns. It's not overly challenging, it's really just a lot of fun. I always liked kind of the crazy guns in these games, the ones that turn your enemies into sheep. You know, those things are pretty awesome. A lot of fun to just blast through the enemies. The thing that makes the gunplay so great is that each gun is super unique. None of them feel the same, none of them play the same, so the fun comes in picking the right gun for the right situation to come out unscathed. Alright, the last franchise that I have that's completely locked away on the PS3 is another one that's really iconic to PlayStation, and that's Resistance. I have Resistance 1 and 2 here that are only available on the PS3. These are like these alternate history, 1950s alien invasion. You have guns of the era, but you also have the aliens weapons that are really futuristic. These have great gameplay and actually a lot of really fun gunplay because just like Ratchet and Clank, this was developed by Insomniac, and they know what they're doing when it comes to a lot of different varied and exciting guns that you just can't find anywhere else. Now I think Resistance 2 actually took a bit of a step back from a gameplay perspective. This is where they limited the amount of guns that you could have. You have the regenerating health, which was of course the style at the time, and kind of went with that muddy brown aesthetic that again was really popular around this time. Everything was made of mud, but even so, these are really fun sci-fi shooters. Alright, so those are my games that are completely locked away on the PS3 hardware, but I have a few more that are mostly locked away because they're only available through streaming. First up is Infamous 1 and 2. I have the collection here. What can I say about Infamous? These absolutely kicked ass. You play as Cole McGrath, what a cool name that is, and you get these powers. Then you get to decide, do you want to be good or do you want to be evil? Do you want to be infamous? And you get to make these choices throughout, and the choices that you make will start to dictate what types of powers that you get. If your actions are more good, you'll start to develop powers that are good. If you take actions that are more evil, then your powers will skew more evil. And what's great about that is it really creates a lot of that replayability where you'll go through all the way playing as good, and then you're gonna wanna go back through and play as evil because it will feel different to have the different set of powers. You start out super weak where just about anything that touches you is gonna kill you. By the end, you feel pretty much like a god where you can just control the elements around you. These are awesome, and they're only available through streaming. Alright, so I already talked about Resistance 1 and 2, and those you can only play on the PlayStation 3 hardware. Resistance 3 you can play through streaming, but it is not the same. You can see this was also compatible with the PlayStation Move, and also touted how it's 3D compatible as well. Now in my opinion, this is the best of the Resistance series. It does away with some of the gameplay criticisms that I had from the second one. You once again have access to all of these different weapons at the same time. You have health packs again. I think the story is really interesting where you're kind of traversing all over the country. They stepped up their game from a visual perspective. It looks fantastic. And some of the boss battles are incredible. So yes, you can play it through streaming. Yes, it will work. It just will not be as good as if you were playing on the PlayStation 3 hardware. Now last but not least, I have one that's actually available as a remaster, but not the original. It's also available through streaming on PlayStation Plus, and that's Demon's Souls. Demon's Souls was the second Souls game that I ever played. I started with Dark Souls, and I loved it. I remember when I went to GameStop and I picked it up, and the guy behind the counter was like, "Dude, this is really hard." And I was like, I know, that's what I heard. And that's what I was so interested in. I just heard in rumor, in legend, about how difficult the game was. And yeah, it was difficult. It was really freaking hard. It might have been one of the hardest games I'd ever played at that time, but there was something really addicting about it. And every time you overcome those challenges that seem completely insurmountable, you feel great. And so once I beat Dark Souls, I was craving for more Souls. And I heard that there was a game called Demon's Souls that really was like the original, so I picked that up, and it was amazing. You could see where a lot of those inspirations from Dark Souls came from. Now, I don't consider the remake for Demon's Souls to be this game. Yes, it is very similar, but it's not the exact same thing. In fact, in many ways, it was built from the ground up as a new game. And you can play the original through streaming on PlayStation Plus, but again, it's not the same. So if you want to play the original game, the only way to play it is on the PlayStation 3 hardware. Alright, so those are my games that are locked away in the PS3. Now why am I talking about it? It's because game preservation is important. These games are locked away, and over time they're going to be less and less and less accessible as that hardware over time becomes harder and harder to get. You know, Sony needs to pick up their game and really double down on what they've dipped their toes into, which is preserving those old games and making them available to us on the current platforms. Alright, did you have a PlayStation 3? What games do you have that are locked away on that console? Which games do you wish were brought forward to the current generation? Love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Now, if you like this video, please give it a like. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so I can continue to expand your gaming horizons. All right, till next time.